All right, let's try that now. See if that is doing anything. Cool. I'm seeing audio levels come in on my app. All right, is that doing anything? I'm seeing audio levels on OBS.
It seems like 30 to 45 seconds behind what's happening.
Oh, yeah? We'll see if that does anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got audio? Cool. All right, well,
It's like a full minute behind.
all right, well, I'll have to just keep an eye on comments so we can get that going. We're gonna wait for this. Hello, my name is Andrew Ashby. I'm going to be doing a Dungeon Master class here in the tavern. We're going to be doing a Dungeon Master class twice a month. So this is the first one for January, and then we're doing another one the last Wednesday of January. Is our Dungeon Master live class. Today I'm going to be talking about combat sucks and you're a terrible Dungeon Master. So if you are a Dungeon Master, this is something that you probably think about a lot. At least it's what I tell myself all the time, that my combat sucks and that I'm a terrible Dungeon Master. But I can help with that. I definitely have a lot of ideas about combat, how to make it interesting and engaging for you and your players. A little bit about me. My name is Andrew Ashby. I own We Geek Together, but I've also been playing role-playing games for over 15 years, tabletop role-playing games specifically, and for the past 4 years I've done it professionally as a professional Dungeon Master for paid games. Hey, good to see you, Cosmere. Sorry, we are doing super choppy. That's good to know. We are streaming on TikTok. No, not TikTok. YouTube. We're on YouTube and Twitch, and that might have a much better connection because I'm just going off an old phone. So if you want to check out, we're doing a Dungeon Master workshop. Maybe I'll turn off Instagram. Hello, you sound like an automaton. Great. Good. Yeah, check us out on YouTube if you want to get a better picture. But yeah, so I've been a professional Dungeon Master for 4 years, and I definitely have opinions on combat. So we're going to talk about the different... I have different things I want to talk about for this. We have our pain points. Why does combat suck? And I actually wanted to kind of open it up to any questions. Style is everything. I want to talk about different combat styles. While you're playing, there's different ways to have a style for your game of combat. I want to talk about enemies, challenges, terrain, how to make those really interesting for your players. Audio keeps breaking. Thanks for letting me know. Check us out on YouTube or Twitch, because Instagram is rough for me. Lastly, we're going to talk about our players, how to brainwash them, how to make our players better at combat. Combat pain points, what are they? And I was actually going to open this up here and ask, try the YouTube channel. It's way clearer on YouTube. Hey, thank you. Oh, hey, Lillian, good to see you. Twitch seems perfect to me. Hey, thanks for everyone joining. I can see comments, by the way. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Instagram's pretty much
Yeah, Instagram is pretty much unusable. So I wanted to ask everyone what their pain points were in combat. What makes combat so terrible? I have a few known items. We have stuff like it's too slow. Okay, that's one of the reasons why people do not like combat. It's too slow. It's a lot of rules. I don't know how to fight / abilities / tactics, or even more, it makes me feel stupid. Yo, Spencer. It makes it pauses the story. Yeah, those are some of the different pain points we have. Players players engage with it differently. Some players really do like combat, but other players just do not really like combat at all. So if you have players who really vibe with combat and other players that don't, that's definitely a sticking point. Players engage with it differently. Okay, so knowing that those are our pain points, I wanted to talk about the different. Here, I'm gonna turn more towards the camera here because I don't have a live audience. It's just you and me and the recording. So let's just address the camera directly. And if you're on Instagram, hello, go check out YouTube or TikTok because it's terrible. Okay, so knowing about this, let's go over our different topics and see what our different topics can help with those. And then we'll return to our pain points. Okay? So first off, when should we use combat? Okay? First off, everything doesn't have to be combat. Even combat doesn't have to be combat. What do I mean? There's a guard in front of a door. Instead of setting up a whole encounter around a single guard in front of a door, if your players are using stealth or try to talk to the guard, it doesn't have to be a combat encounter. Even if the guard draws their sword, okay, the guard is pretty outnumbered and overwhelmed by a whole party of players, I wouldn't set up a whole initiative account just for a single guard. Think about how you can streamline combat this way. Can I better tell the story through narration and player input, or will the story be better told through chance and strategy? And that's really the question you want to ask yourself, is it better to actually engage in combat, or can we just narrate this out? Some possible solutions are narrate a guard assassination after a single attack roll, or after the tides of combat have turned, ask the players how they want to finish off their enemies if there's no clear lasting threat. So the goblins are broken, their morale is broken, and they're just going to flee into the woods. Ask the players how they're going to chase them and kill them in the woods, or if they're going to let them stay free. Enemies can run away and flee. In fact, enemies have the instinct to survive. They don't have to fight till the bitter end. And a lot of animals and smart creatures will not fight to the bitter end. So having them flee, disengage from combat can be a very valid way to end the combat. So you don't have to fight till the bitter end. Let's talk about style. Style is everything. Okay, and what is yours? Do you like gritty, realistic, tactical combat? Do you like cinematic, powerful, fantastical combat? Do you like combat puzzles? Enemies with different stages and weaknesses. Your setting can dictate this. Are you playing a horror game, a historical game, a fantasy game, a sci-fi? Depending on what game you are playing, that can also dictate the style of your combat. And in fact, I would say mechanics are probably one of the best and most heavy set ways to decide your tone and your style for combat. A great example, if you want to play a Street Fighter kind of RPG where you're basing your attacks around combos, around elemental attacks, like a dojo or a fighting rink, 5e is pretty ill-equipped for fist-to-fist combat. It's just, all right, you hit me and then I hit you and then you hit me. Versus a system called Fight! Is an amazing system that is built from the ground up to capture the feeling of parrying, blocking, different moves, different stances, defensive, offensive, in just fistfights. So if you want to capture a fistfight, you might want to move to a different system if that's kind of a style you want to capture for the campaign. Remember, the best fights tell stories. I want to name some of our favorite fight scenes in movies. Some of my favorite fight scenes, realizing too late that combat is too easy or too hard. Hey, thank you. Yes, that is a problem. As a dungeon master, it's hard to balance on the fly. But I want to talk about some of our favorite fight scenes. We have the Princess Diaries with Inigo Montoya and the Dread pirate Roberts. They have a huge fencing fight on top of this mountain, and it's a fantastic fight scene. Or Pirates of the Caribbean, you have Will Turner versus Captain Jack Sparrow. And these are one-on-one fights, but we can even do party fights like the Lord of the Rings, the fight on Helm's Deep, where you have different players in different areas, or Lord of the Rings, where everyone is fighting on top of Weathertop, where the ring wraiths surround all the players. These are all iconic fights. Think about the Avengers fighting against Thanos in the last Thanos film. These are all really cool cinematic fights, but each one of them tells a story while you're fighting, and that's a really unique challenge that you might want to capture. When in cinematography school, we're taught that if you just have a fight for a fight's sake, it's kind of boring, it's kind of a wash, so you need to move the story forward while you are fighting. Hi, Colton.
Hi.
We have our first live audience member. Do you have any favorite fight scenes from any movies, shows? What's a favorite fight scene of yours? I noted the duel on between Captain Jack Sparrow and the blacksmith guy in the first Pirates of the Caribbean, or Inigo Montoya and Dread Captain Roberts for Princess Bride. Those are great fight scenes.
There's a lot of really great fight scenes in Demon Slayer.
Demon Slayer, anime has some of the coolest fight scenes, and boy, what a cool style as well. Demon Slayer has a lot of cool fight scenes. You could honestly just YouTube anime fight scenes, and you'll get some really awesome ideas. Okay, so watch. So I've got homework with this section. Use a fight scene that you like as inspiration for a story beat that you want to share. Okay, so let's do the Demon Slayer fight with the spider guy. Okay, the spider guy. Okay, this is a really cool fight. So there's a spider guy, you have your samurai guy, and there is a victim, someone who's trapped by the spider guy. So the samurai guy has to pretty much do all or nothing. He has to go all in to kill a spider guy, and the samurai knows, I will probably die, but I can't leave this victim, this prisoner, to the spider guy. I have to. It's all or nothing, and so that's kind of the story beat that fight captures. Kind of a helpless story beat. It seems like the spider guy is too powerful for the players or for the character, so they just have to give it all or nothing. So that can be kind of your inspiration. That maybe is what you want to share. Maybe a villain, and the villain is grossly overpowered, and it has a key NPC, or maybe a pet, or a magical item, or maybe even another player as a hostage, and that player will die in 2 rounds unless the players give it everything they have to kill the villain. And in 2 turns, the poor victim will die. It's guaranteed they're going to die, and the players just have to try to go all out. The problem with the spider guy is, since he had the victim and he was getting ready to pull the victim, he himself had to kind of hold back because he was still connected. He's part of his hand was just tied to the victim, so he couldn't fight at full strength against the samurai. Even though he was still a very formidable opponent. So yeah, think about a fight scene and think about how the story you want to tell in the fight scene, and build your mechanics, your encounter around that. So there are kind of 4 different paintbrushes you have when you're building a combat encounter. So you have your goal. Okay, and we touched on a goal. A goal is a story or something you want to share with the combat. You have the enemies themselves, how your enemies work mechanically, how much health they have, what attacks they do. That is also a way to paint a narrative. You have the terrain itself, the location that your players are fighting in. For the spider battle, it was in the middle of the forest with a bunch of deadly spider webs all around. And then you have any challenge that is presented in the combat encounter. The challenge for this one is there is a prisoner trapped, and we have a limited time to get that prisoner before they die. So these are kind of the basic 4 tools that you can pull and manipulate to really make an interesting combat encounter. And don't feel like you have to use all of them every single encounter. In fact, you can think of a lot of fight scenes that only use 1 or 2. The Pirates of the Caribbean Will Smith versus Captain Jack Sparrow is all about terrain, a really cool fight scene inside a tiny claustrophobic blacksmith's area. And then the goal of Captain Jack, he's trying to escape, and the goal of Will Turner is to try to capture the captain. But there wasn't any extra challenge on top of that besides what was happening organically in the fight. And there was only a single enemy. There wasn't any other enemies in there. So yeah, don't feel like you need to paint with all 4 of these tools when you try to create a combat encounter. And in fact, limiting some of these can actually force you to be more creative. If you just want a really interesting combat encounter, try to just focus on enemies and terrain, or try to just focus on a really interesting goal and have the terrain be the hardest part about achieving that goal. And the enemies can just be cannon fodder. There's so many different ways you can use these tools. Homework for this section is to watch Action-Oriented Monsters on YouTube by MCDM. I'm going to check the comments real quick. Okay, cool. Colton, any thoughts here since I've got you live? Any questions or any things you want to elaborate on? Okay. So yeah, we have our goal, we have our enemies, we have terrain, and we have challenge to build our encounters with. By the way, this PowerPoint slideshow I will post on Facebook, just a free link. So if anybody wants to go through this whole talk that I have, they can also see these slides. Now let's talk about our players. Okay, players need to play, and they need to have fun while playing. And this is usually the sticking point, because a lot of players engage with combat differently. Some people feel like, wow, it's really tough. Some people think it's not tough enough. Some people have broken characters. Some people have really cool abilities that they want to use, but they don't ever really get a use for them. So here's some ways to work with your players, kind of even the playing field for them all, and try to make combat universally fun for them. Part of your job as a dungeon master is to teach how you want your players to do combat. Every dungeon master is going to have their preferences. I like to tell my players before, when you roll your attack roll, you're also going to roll your damage dice at the same time. And I will warn you before your turn starts. I will say, all right, player 1, it is your turn. Player 2, you are on deck. Start thinking about what you're doing. Okay? So I give you a warning before. I do start to impose time limits if I feel like players are taking too long of a time to figure out their next moves. So, but my goal as a dungeon master isn't to punish players for playing mechanically poorly. As in, it's not my it's not my job as a dungeon master to punish unknowing players who don't really know how to play. It's my job to teach my players how to play. Then once my players know how to play and how to play well, then I can freely punish them for misplaying, for making blatant mistakes. And that's where you can really stick it to them. Session 0 is a fantastic place to do a training combat session. No pressure. Hey, you go out onto the field, there's a training dummy, let's just go over the basic combat mechanics, okay? And for brand new players, just teach them their bread and butter combo. Say, hey, by the way, you're a druid. You're going to want to shape into a wolf, and you're going to want to bite. And when you're not doing that, when you're your normal form, you're going to use Thorn Whip. And that's mostly what you're going to do. Now, you have these other spells that you can read on your own time, but just practice being a wolf and biting or using Thorn Whip. And that's your bread and butter until you kind of feel more comfortable with upgrading. One really great thing you can do for beginner players is buy sets of dice that match specific highlighter colors. For example, go buy 5 sets of dice: orange, red, yellow, blue, okay, and then whatever other color. Then use those dice and highlight on their character sheet where they are going to use those dice. So for example, if they're going to use a longbow, and that is a D8, I believe, if we're using 5e, is a longbow a D8 or a D10?
The longbow's a D8.
D8. Okay, cool. So if they're going to shoot with a longbow, they're going to use a D8, which is going to be a green D8. So you'll just highlight the highlight that. All right, we lost the Instagram stream, but that's fine. It was doing nothing. So yeah, you can highlight what dice they want to use, and that's a great way to get a brand new player kind of rolling. You can also give them special dice for special weapons. Hey, you just got a +1 longsword, and guess what? When you roll, you're going to want to roll this D8 or this D10, and I have a special custom D8 or D10 for you. That's a cool way to make a new mechanic or a new weapon feel really cool for your players. If they got a legendary item and they get a legendary set of dice with that. Talk to your players before combat and figure out what do they like and what do they not like. Again, this is a great session 0. Hey, have you guys played D&D before? How do you like your combat? What are the things you enjoy? What are the things you don't enjoy about combat? It's okay to give spotlights to particular players for combat. Just make sure to share the love with other players during other different combat encounters. So you have the player, you want to kind of capture, again, that swashbuckling duel between a Captain Jack Sparrow and a Will Turner. So maybe you build that up specifically between one player, and you have them challenged to a duel and fight to the side, and then you have a bunch of minions who keep the rest of the players busy, and then give the other players a challenge. Welcome, travelers. Are you guys here for the Dungeon Master class?
Yeah, just sit in.
Come on in. Now, we have recorded everything and live streamed everything, and we'll be sharing this whole presentation as well on not only YouTube, but we'll have the slides up on Facebook. So even though we missed out on the first bit, no worries, because we have all that as a resource. As I was saying, it is totally okay to spotlight a specific character. Think about one of my favorite anime fights is Rock Lee versus Gaara in the Chunin exams. All right, so let's give one of our players an opportunity to have that. So we talk to our monk a few sessions before this fight, and we say, hey, I'm going to give you weights, and I'm going to have you fight at normal, and then when you take the weights off, you are going to double your speeds or double your stats or something like that. So you can give that to your players. Or if you're really mean, you can give that to your villains. You can give a moment where your villain was like, all right, I'm done holding back, and then they take off their weights, or they swap the sword to their right hand, or they take off their armor that has been holding back their power the entire time. And that's a really mean thing to do to your players. That's a fantastic thing to use for your final villain. If all your players have been going all out against the villain, and then it turns out they've just been fighting them on easy mode just to test the players, that's a great way for your players to just have an absolute hatred for a villain. The goal of combat can be to let your players do cool things. You just gave your wizard just leveled up to cast, and they can cast Fireball. Just put a bunch of goblins really close together in a room and that will be probably the happiest player for the entire night because he got to do the fireball thing. So it's totally okay to create an encounter for the goal specifically to reward a player for a cool moment or a cool item they got. Again, remember that we're trying to tell stories with our combats. If you just throw goblins at the players just to have goblins, sure, you killed some time, but that's kind of a bad movie trope if they're just action for action. So instead, you want to think of what is my goal for my players. What do I want to accomplish in this combat? I'll go back real quick, just a slide here. When you are planning your encounters, these are 4 really important things I try to think about. I try to think about the goal of the encounter. What story am I trying to tell with my players? I think about the enemies involved, okay? Because the enemies, their mechanics, how the enemies work, can really help flavor the encounter. I think about the terrain of the encounter, the world itself around the players. Can I use the terrain for my enemy advantage? Can my players use the terrain? How can I use the terrain to tell the story? Think of like Weathertop, the top of Weathertop, where the ring wraiths are coming in from the dark, and they only have a fire in the middle, and these ring wraiths are coming in from pitch black to fight the party. Think about, lastly, an outside challenge, an outside element that the players are trying to overcome. Maybe a victim that they need to save, maybe a countdown timer before a bomb goes off, maybe a puzzle that one of them has to solve to open the door before they get overwhelmed by undead. Think of whatever challenge you are in. These are kind of the 4 things. Anytime I build a combat encounter, if I can have some of these in play, that will just force me to have a better combat encounter instead of there's goblins in this square room and fight. So that's a really good thing. Combat can be a challenge, or combat can be a reward itself, and we talked about that, how to give your wizard a chance to use fireball. All right, so that is kind of my last thoughts about combat and all the different ways to do that. I will open up to Q&A for any of those who are online. I see I have a few watchers. And if there are no questions from there, I'll also take questions from you guys, because you just guys came in, and I'm happy to just go right from the start and fill in that first half, because I appreciate you guys showing up, and I don't want to leave you out here. I'm not seeing any comments from the live stream. Do comment in here, though. What I'll do is I'll probably just cut right here. So thanks for watching the live stream, and thanks for watching the recording afterwards. And then if I have something else, I'll cut to, if we have any good revelations, we'll cut here. All right, but let me real quick go over the first slides. So you guys get a bit more context of what I was just talking about. Okay, so this is a thing I think about myself constantly. My combat sucks, and I'm a terrible DM. My name's Andrew. I've been playing RPGs for over 15 years, and I've done it 4 years professionally as a paid dungeon master. I wanted to talk about these different areas. I wanted to talk about pain points, what frustrates players, why do people not like combat. I want to talk about style. I want to talk about enemies and challenges. I want to talk about the players themselves, and then open it up for Q&A. So combat pain points, and now that we have some people here, we can ask you guys. These are common pain points I have heard, but if you have other combat pain points, let's get them on the list here so we can try to address these. Okay? So combat, it's too slow. It just takes a lot of time. It's a slog, and it's slow and boring. Okay? It's a lot of rules. There's a lot of stuff especially for new players, especially if you're trying to play the druid or some of those other high concept classes. There's a lot of mechanics you have to start to work on. That's pretty tough. And that ties into, I don't know how to fight. I don't know how to use my abilities. I don't know tactics. It makes me feel stupid. If your players feel stupid, it's a terrible disservice to your players, and that really takes the fun out of combat for them. It pauses the story, okay? Storytelling comes to a halt. All the fun role-playing comes to a halt, and it's just rolling dice and math. And then another pain point is players engage with it differently. There's some players who love combat. You know, they like war games and they like strategy, and there's other people who their bread and butter is the role playing and spending time with friends. And so combat isn't really why they came to play D&D in the first place. They wanted more of the story and the funny voices and that kind of stuff. And nothing wrong with that, actually. That's a fantastic way to play D&D. But yeah, when we want to have combat, we want to know these pain points. Do you guys have any specific pain points?
We're going to move up here.
Yeah.
Probably that's because I sat back here because I didn't want to get in the way of the live stream.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is fine.
Oh, yeah, that's way.
Do you guys have any specific pain points for combat? Any pain points for you or as a dungeon master for your players?
So I'm the dungeon master here. They're the player.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of them.
So my pain point is the third point, which is where I'm playing a cleric, but I don't feel like I make a good support or healer.
Okay. So this right here. Yeah. That's a fantastic pain point, and it happens a lot. It happens a lot, and it really takes the wind out of the sails for players. Okay.
And I think from my end, to be fair, being the DM, it's less like my frustrations and more like I'm responding to their frustrations. And my players are definitely, I have 2 different games, but only one of them is actually in Dungeons and Dragons. The other one's more like, it's kind of a mesh of different systems, and that one, it's free, loose enough that this isn't really an issue. But for the one that it is, they're very role play. They're very, they're like, they're here for the tragedy. They're here to fight like this like great epic and all this stuff. And then we just had a combat encounter where we basically went from like all these things happening in session, and then we get to a combat encounter, and that single encounter took 2 different sessions to resolve. So it's like the wind out of the sails is very accurate.
Grindy.
Yes.
Grindy. Combat absolutely feels grindy. Okay.
It's gotten to the point that this party, they're a part of it, has almost gone out of their way to be a stealth-based party, so they can get around combats. Because they're so into the role play and all that stuff. But
It also tracks with our characters.
that's true.
Yep.
Very in character.
But the hard thing is that they know the next like quote unquote arc of this is going to have more combats in it. So I think that this is good times for this lesson.
Sweet. Okay. Great. These are great pain points. So let's keep on talking, and we'll see if we address, and then we'll come back here and we'll wrap up with Q&A and see if we can solve any specific problems.
Sorry.
No. That was perfect. Okay. Because now that I know that, I can try to target my next things to these pain points. Okay, so a big question is when to use combat. Everything doesn't have to be combat, and even combat doesn't have to be combat. For example, can I better tell the story through narration and player input, or will the story better be told through dice rolls and strategy? And that's the question. That's really the big question to ask. So if my players are engaging with things very stealthily and they want to avoid combat because it's a slog, and their characters are kind of more, built, like coded for stealth. As a dungeon master, maybe what I do is my combat encounters pivot more towards stealth encounters, and the punishment for losing in stealth is a very snappy but very brutal combat where like your players are gonna take a huge chunk of damage, and then the enemy dies real quick, or an alarm happens, and now the rest of the stealth combat system is going to be a lot tougher. Okay, so possible solutions: you can narrate a guard getting assassinated after in a single attack roll. Combat itself, I always find there usually is a peak in combat, And then after that peak happens, I usually try to cut it off as soon as possible. So your players are outnumbered and we don't know what's going to happen, and the enemies have a wizard in the back line. But as soon as that wizard dies, or as soon as my players are not outnumbered, or as soon as the prisoner is freed, okay, as soon as the players can breathe, that's where I try to wrap up combat. I ask my players, all right, you guys have clearly bested your enemy. Your enemies are going to try to flee. Is there anything you want to do while they try to flee? And let them narrate. Oh yeah, as they're fleeing, I'm gonna shoot them in the back with my arrow, or I'm gonna chase them down, or I'm gonna lock the door and say you're trapped in here with me. You know, morale is a very much a real thing in combat, and people give up on combat all the time. Especially sentient people will rather turn away and run if they ever feel like they are on the losing side. So I will almost never have players fight to the final thing standing. And that when I learned that was a great eye-opening for me. So you can absolutely narrate a lot of interactions before you actually have to roll a lot of dice and set up initiative and that kind of stuff. So yeah, when to use combat is a question you got to ask yourself. Okay. Now let's talk about style, because I believe style is everything, and it's going to dictate how you approach combat. And this is a question for you as a dungeon master, but it's also a question for what your players want. Okay. Do you like gritty, realistic, slog, tactical combat? Okay. Do you like cinematic, powerful, fantastical combat? Do you like combat puzzles? Enemies with different stages, weaknesses, and fighting styles. Your setting in the game itself can dictate combat. Are you in a horror setting, a historical setting, a fantasy setting, or a sci-fi? All of that will actually influence your style of combat. Mechanics play a super heavy part in the style of your game. If I wanted to run a game that's based on Street Fighter, if I wanted to run a Street Fighter campaign, I'm not going to use 5e because there is a system called Fight! That is literally about comboing and elemental punches and different poses and fighting techniques to take down your enemy, and it's much more of a fighting style kind of game versus 5e, which is kind of just 5e has pretty much all of its corners shaved off to be a very generic system, which makes it approachable, but it doesn't really have any style to it. It's just a system that works, but it doesn't have anything super unique that makes it feel like Street Fighter or a sci-fi system or even a fantasy system. It's mostly the spells and the abilities that make it a fantasy system, not the actual rolling of the dice, the actual bare bones mechanics. So we know, cool, yeah, we can see that. Yeah, so your mechanics play a heavy part in that. So again, if my players are like, if they're like, wow, they're actually engaging in stealth and then they really like stealth, I would try to build my combat encounters instead all around stealth. And I would draw a map and I would draw enemies with cones of vision and let them tackle that way. Because that is still very much a combat encounter, and you can even track initiative on how your enemies are moving, and you can give certain mechanics of how far they can see or what kind of actions cause what noise. If that is what your players are engaging with more.
I think the other thing they also engage in is that when they get into combat, it's either that they want to stealth their way out of it, or they want to try to talk their way out of it. And then that doesn't always mean like the talk no jutsu, like we're on the same team now, but it can be like, hey, there's someone over there, shouldn't you be fighting him? And it's like that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I completely understand that. So I have a philosophy that is whatever your players are engaging with, in your world, reward that, okay? Because if they're engaging with your game, that means there's interest in your game. So if I have stuff that my players are like, ooh, we want to deceive people or we want to distract them, maybe I would build a special mechanic in for deceiving or distracting. Maybe I would give some people some spells to do that. And I can then build my lore and my world around the items that they are engaging with. When I reward what they're interacting with, it gives a positive feedback loop where they're like, wow, if we solve this problem through stealth, then that means stealth is good. And so then if I pour more of my time and preparation into stealth and then I make it a bit more challenging, and that's where I'm going to get my fun, because I make it harder and more challenging, and then they overcome that problem. They're going to be like, wow, stealth is really good, okay? And so maybe my big bad Vecna isn't really the best villain for a stealth campaign, but is there a way that I can find a way for my players to kill Vecna using stealth, okay? Is there something I can do there? And so that's the question I ask myself. Now, however, as a dungeon master, you have a soul. And so if you yourself, you hate stealth with a passion, and the idea of plotting out maps for stealth and the idea of trying to come up with some cool mechanics for sound sounds like an absolute chore, all right, then that's also fine, because you're running the game for these people. So instead, try to find something else that they still engage with, that you also feel rewarded by help giving positive feedback to. So that's my philosophy with that. All right, so homework. Go find a fight scene and ask yourself, how would you have a moment similar to this in one of your upcoming fights? Or go find a stealth scene and see what mechanics can you incorporate, okay? Or go watch a spy movie and see the cool spy moments that happen and be like, okay, how can I incorporate their mechanics into this?
Well, I'm also realizing that, because like I said, I have those two different games. One of them, they love fighting, and there is some overlap in those groups. And I think what also could be there is that the other fight is a lot more fast and loose, where there is hard rules for how the things work, but I don't hold turn order as much of a definitive. It's more like, you guys can go now the enemy gets to respond. They did a thing, how are you responding?
Yeah.
This kind of thing where, like you bring up like Rock Lee, and it's like, the way that game works is that I use some of Tenra Bancho Zero, but most of it is basically me rules lawyering different shows that they all liked, and then I just threw them into a world together and said, all right, go out and try to figure out how these powers work, and I'll rules lawyer how they work. But,
sounds super fun.
And I think also, like, I'm looking at them, like, I think the difference is they still do like getting into encounters, but they don't like the mechanics of that slow them down. But I do think, like, for example, loves those moments when it's like we're facing down, there's this great emotional tension there with the enemy, but then they're like, all right, now we're in turn order, roll your dice and all this stuff. And it's like, I think that's where the struggle can be, is that it's like, it's almost like a video game cutscene where it's like, oh yes, we're here to do this big fight. And then we transition to combat and it's like, all right, we've kind of lost some of the luster in there.
100%. Okay, good. Let's go on, Colton.
I'm hearing some common threads in this that I don't even know if you're picking up. Just from the way you're describing the party that doesn't really like combat, and from your comment as well, it sounds like most of your party doesn't understand. And so they're taking too long trying to think of how does this work. And so something he went over in one slide was, as a dungeon master, it's your responsibility to teach them how.
Yeah.
And he said, like, a good session 0 is a good time where you can have a no low consequence, no risk combat, where you just go out with a combat dummy and you say, okay, this is how it works. We're going to be quick. Initiative is rolled and we're fighting, and it's moving. And then another aspect of that is if everything just stays static and it's just everybody stands in one place and punches or casts a spell, it slows down. It becomes a bog and it's boring. So keeping things moving, teaching them how to use their abilities, teaching them how combat works, and keeping the system itself moving.
So I'll say this: as a game master, you are allowed to remove things that players don't like, and you can add things that players like. So one thing I would do for better immersion is I'd have my players roll initiative at the beginning of the session. Before we even start, everyone, just take 3 d20s, roll them, give me a note card with your initiative count, and also just give me what right now your starting HP and your AC. Okay? So then you can seamlessly blend that cutscene into combat. All right, you have fallen for my trap. And then the villain, who I already know his AC is 22 because I rolled for it before, is going first, and he strikes at player 2. By the way, just to remind you guys, it's going order 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Player 2, you barely have time to react. What are you going to do? Okay, so there are ways if it's like, wow, they're getting lost in the sauce here and it feels like a video game cutscene, try to massage how the different mechanics interact with each other through your own work. As a dungeon master, you can have everyone roll initiative first, or you can loosen up the initiative counter altogether. You can say, hey, we're not going to do initiative anymore, and instead we're going to have heroes go first and then bad guys go first, except for if I think the bad guy's super speedy, then the bad guy's going to go first before you guys. So I'm fine with eliminating mechanics that players don't like. If you want, and again, reward them for interesting use of rules. Okay, if somebody has a cool spell and they use it well, or somebody uses flanking, okay, and you see somebody using tactics, or if somebody's like, ooh, you go first and then I will do this spell, say, hey, that's really cool, let's give you advantage for doing that. So you can reward players for doing that kind of stuff, and you can reward them following the mechanics that you've tried to lay out. Hey, we're going to try to run combat this way, and since it's my first time running combat this way, and it's going to be kind of weird, how about I say, let's just roll with advantage. Or let's not even roll damage dice. Let's just say everyone, if you hit, you just do max damage. Okay, so we don't have to worry about all. Let's just focus on rolling the attack dice and figuring that out. We can just forego damage dice and either just take the median, or we can just take the max, that kind of stuff. So feel free to work with your players and say, I'm going to try something new, I'm going to try something different, or carrot on a string. Hey, since you actually worked with my initiative system that I set up, I'm going to give you a reward. If a player is ready to act, okay, hey, player 1, you're on deck. Player 2, you're next. And when I get to player 2, hey, player 2, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going to dash in and I'm going to use my action surge. Hey, you know what? Since you were so fast, I'm just going to give you inspiration because I appreciate you being ready. Okay? Boom. Give them a little treat. And it sounds, the way I'm using treats is almost like I'm training dogs. Okay? Where I just give you a little treat, a little sugar, it's definitely Pavlovian, because your job as a dungeon master is to maximize fun at the table. That's really your whole goal. I want to have the most fun possible with all these players because I like them and they're my friends, and we want to have fun together. And so rewarding the behavior you want to see will teach your players, this is the correct way to play. And it will help. It'll help grease the gears. And if they have something that they're frustrated about, something that they keep on bumping to, oh man, like I hate having to look for my spells. Maybe I buy you spell cards, or maybe I really just cut it down to you have 3 spells, and then just boom, here are your 3 spells. Don't worry about the other spells, because honestly, they're not as good. And if you want to do something weird with your spell, I'll just right here. If you want to do something weird, magical, like levitate an object, we're not going to look up the rules for telekinesis. Just tell me what you want to do. I'll tell you what spell slot you're going to use. So yeah, you can do that. The more you train your players how to play your game, the easier it becomes for you as a dungeon master to run your game. I'd like to train my players how to subtract the HP from the monsters. So what I'll do is I will put dice by the monsters, and I'll say, hey, anytime you damage that enemy, just move the dice up so we can see how much damage is on them. And then, oh, okay, I did 10 points of damage, and then I'll just take the dice and they'll take it up. So then players get to see the damage, and that's just good knowledge for everyone. And so that allows them to kind of be a bit more tactful, because they now see what enemies are low on health, and then they can focus on them instead of having to be like, wait, which goblin did you shoot at last time? They can actually see that. Information's great. That's a great way to also limit frustration. The more information you can have easily available is great. The more information that's stacked in books or in rules frustrates players. So one thing I do during combat is I print out a little combat helper. Hey, here's the different actions you could use. And that's fantastic for new players. For my experienced players, it doesn't do anything, but that's fine. But yeah, I like to have little combat tricks. Okay, remember your best fights tell stories. Best combat encounters tell stories. Best challenges tell stories. You can give specific players their chance to shine. We talked about the Rock Lee moment, but we can set up combat encounters that work really well for a specific player. Hey, I really want this player to engage with their long range arrow mechanics. So I'm going to put some enemies super far away that are pretty easy to hit for my Legolas-like character to just be able to shoot fish in a barrel. And that's going to make them feel really good about being able to shoot fish in a barrel. I want my fighter to engage more with their champion trait. So I'm going to try to gear my encounter towards really leaning into them using their champion tactics. And another great thing that you can absolutely do as a dungeon master before a combat encounter starts is to give your player a warning. Hey, by the way, and you can do this before the session. It's best to do it before the session or through a private message. Hey, by the way, I have an upcoming combat encounter that your certain ability might be very helpful for, or I want you to come prepared with this animal wild shape because that will make combat really interesting, or hey, this spell might be a real key thing. And don't tell them everything, but just give them a little something to look forward. Hey, by the way, I'm going to let you take off your weights for this combat encounter, or you're going to find an enemy that has a similar fighting style to you. And so then they get to see an enemy that has a similar fighting style, then they get to challenge him, and they have to use that same mechanic against the enemy, and then when they beat that enemy using that mechanic, boy, that's going to feel better. That's going to feel amazing because you've positive feedbacked that mechanic for that player.
Can use that idea to teach how people's characters' abilities work.
Yeah. No,
You're struggling to learn a cleric, is that right?
Yeah.
You pull up a cleric as their enemy, and you start using your specific abilities against the players to show them how it works.
Ooh, that would be a fantastic encounter. An enemy cleric who's constantly healing their opponents. So then your team has to focus on killing that cleric as fast as possible. And you're very clear on how that works. And maybe you even create a little handout for that cleric of like, hey, the cleric, step 1 has healing word, and step 2 has healing aura. And boom, I have that for me as a dungeon master, and then I can give that to the player after I've just after they've destroyed that cleric. Or maybe it's a death cleric where when they heal your team, it hurts them, and so your cleric has to try to heal them as fast as possible while this other cleric is healing them necrotically, which is hurting them. So those are two fantastic ways to like force them to engage with their mechanics, and it could be a really cool encounter. All right, we talked about enemy challenges, terrain, and mechanics. These are kind of your 4 different paint brushes you have to paint your picture of a combat encounter. When I write combat encounters, I like to write these like in a box nearby, near the enemies, so I can try to figure out what am I actually doing with these, okay? Because if I don't have any of these figured out, I'm going to have a super bland combat encounter. But if I can figure out just some of these, I don't have to figure all of them out, but if I can figure out some of these, it really gives me an engaging combat encounter. Like it says, don't feel like you have to use them all at once. A final boss fight, sure, but pick 2 that sound more interesting to you to tell a story for this part of the game. There's the Lord of the Rings fight in Minas Tirith, where the Fellowship is running down the staircase. Okay, so that's using terrain. Very interesting terrain. The staircase is crumbling away. They have to be making acrobatics checks. And they have a challenge. Get out before the Balrog cooks us. So they're all just trying to get out as fast as possible. The enemies are barely existent. All the enemies are just plinking away arrows pretty terribly. But, you know, your enemy archer can have a time to shine to just kill enemies shooting a fish in a barrel. So that's an example of that. And we talked about Weathertop, where the ring wraiths are coming in from the pitch black. So you have a really interesting terrain. You're on top of a mountain with pitch black surrounding you, and you have really unique enemies that like create fear and can scream and can see invisible people. And you have a really interesting challenge, which is there's only a single source of light, which is the fire in the middle, until Aragorn picks up a torch and then starts fighting the rest of the ring wraiths. So yeah, the goal is, what are you trying to do as a dungeon master? You know, am I trying to teach a player a mechanic? Am I trying to reward a player? Am I trying to show them how terrifying the villain is? Do I want to introduce a new enemy type so now my players understand more about the lore of the world? Okay, enemies are lore into your world, so introducing a new enemy type like a werewolf suddenly introduces a whole new side to your world your players didn't expect. So that can be your goal. Your enemies, how they interact with, how they fight, what your enemies can do mechanically really tells a story. And I would give you homework to watch Action-Oriented Monsters by MCDM if you want to think really about how your enemies' mechanics work. It's a fantastic, it's like a 30-minute video, but it's super cool just about mechanically how do you build your enemies. The terrain, what is your terrain doing? And then lastly, is there any outside of combat challenge? Are your players trying to protect an artifact? Are they trying to get from point A to point B? Is there a victim that they need to save? Is the wind just blowing so hard that it might push them off the cliff? So those are the different 4 kind of things you can ask yourself when creating a combat encounter. All right, and then you guys came in on the slide, and then we touched on all that stuff. But yeah, part of your job is to teach how to do combat, reward players when they engage with the things you want, and then find out the pain points that they are struggling with, and find out how you can either change your system to better fit those pain points or eliminate them. Color-coded dice. Fantastic for beginner players where, hey, when you swing with your sword, just use this D10. And when you swing with when you shoot with your bow, use this green D6. Or if you're going to use a spell, use these dice. Special themed dice for weapons is one of the coolest things ever. If you want to give your player something super cool, hey, every time you cast Fireball, here's your fireball dice. Or if you want to heal, here's your healing dice. Or if you want to, like, everyone loves shiny math rocks. If you give somebody, hey, use these math rocks for this specific thing, you bet they're going to be trying to roll those as much as possible. So that's a very fun thing to do. Talk to players before, figure out what their pain points are. Hey, I don't really know how to be a good cleric, or I don't know anything about a monk, or my monk feels really bland, or as a fighter, I feel like I'm not doing much at all, and the barbarian and the wizard are way cooler. Find out what their pain points are, and then try to work around that. It's okay to give spotlights to players. It's absolutely okay to, hey, this combat is mostly going to be how cool Joe is, okay? And then after Joe has this sweet combat, is going to be about this person. Goal of combat can be to let the players do cool things. That's a fantastic goal. Combat can be a challenge or a reward itself. Cool. Thank you. All right, so we'll open it up. Thank you. We'll open it up. Any other questions? And it doesn't have to be about combat. We can now just talk about anything. If we have any questions, how do we world build? Calendar, that kind of stuff. Is there anything that somebody who's been a dungeon master for quite a bit might have some insights or knowledge to?
Yeah, well, for me, at this point, I am like a bit experienced, but I think it's in a weird way. I started. There was like a mental health program like in Orem, and when we went there, I was. The last D&D group fell through. I had been listening to like D&D style podcasts for a long time, but never like actually like how to do it. It was just a lot of like absorbing the campaigns and information.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I've spent the first decade of my life basically just writing for fun, very creative person. So I straight up lied. And I told them, oh, I'm an experienced DM. You don't have anyone else. I can do it. And they go, really? And I go, yeah, I had never
done it once.
Played.
Oh my goodness.
And so I do that, and apparently I am good enough at bluffing and a lot of things like that.
You rolled high off on that deception.
Yeah, basically. And they bought it, and back then I was smart enough to use a system that was very light on mechanics. So I could just take advantage of my writing like skills and like coming up with creative like stories and stuff like that. But now I am considered the experienced DM in the group. But I also like barely know how I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like constantly being the one where it's like, okay, I'm gonna go absorb the lore, and then it's like, all right, let's start playing, and then they're like, all right, so we should roll, right? And I'm like, yes. And then I had to teach myself as I was going, because there's a lot better ways I could have gone about this, but so I'm in the position like you brought up, like oh, they don't know necessarily how to play, and I'm like, that's true. I'm also a little bit in that position sometimes, where I go in, and I think that also leads to sometimes it's like a symbiotic thing, like where we don't always get into combat, because when we're not in combat, it's just me telling a collective story, and there's also stats in front of me that I'm like, is this related? Roll that.
Yeah.
And then we have one person who definitely knows, because they're very experienced, and I have to kind of like every once in a while fish out of them like, that's how you do it, right? And they're like, yeah, of course it is. Like, you know that. I'm like, yes.
Yes.
I know that.
All right. So you just dove into the deep end.
Yes.
Yes.
And somehow survived. And now, like when it comes to maximizing fun, I'm in a good place in the sense that like my players get very mad at me when I have to delay. They're pretty invested, but now my bigger issue is less about getting them to the fun point. They're at the fun point, but I also know that for them, it's not just being at the table having fun. It's about telling a story that they can then like hold on to for the future and tell their friends about. So where I'm struggling is getting into those moments where it's like, we have to do the stuff that's not always the most fun, because I know if we do some of this really challenging, hard stuff, It'll be a more impactful story for you all that you'll tell over time.
Yeah.
So that's where like combat comes in, where it's like, I know you don't always want to be in combat, but then you also always, after the fact, talk about that time you were in combat. So while you're in it, you're not always having the most fun. But when you're out of it, you're like, oh my God, we barely survived that. Remember that time when like there was the weakened Mind Flayer and we all had to jump in and we were also scared if it was going to work or not? That one did happen, they can confirm.
Yeah.
And it was like, those moments, they hold on to. But when we're doing them, they are always like, oh, can't we go back? I know you like the role play, but you're going to remember this moment more.
Yeah.
It ties into the different types of fun concept where there's like one that's just, it's simple, easy fun, and there's the challenging fun where you accomplished something. Players need to feel like they accomplished something.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, challenging them, throwing things that may not be fun in the moment.
Yeah. No, it's because if I had to say what my strengths were as a DM, it would be I'm not always the best at like just creating something out of nothing. But if you give me a world, I'll be able to make sense.
That's a huge strength.
And like originally, it was the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's the one where I DM'd it, and that I found this very nice rule system that now I actually think has been deleted from the internet. I have not been able to find it.
Oh, sad. That happened. So.
And since then, it has exploded. I think we're in year 6 of that single game.
Yeah.
And they're still like mad at me that I had to cancel 2 weeks ago. They're like, we need more, and I'm like, okay. But then this one is in the Forgotten Realms. That's because I'm just like, just give me lore. I can interpret it, and then I can give you a story out of it. So we're in that, and we're telling a story in there, and they're loving it. But at the same time, like I said, they're always like, we're having so much fun in the role play. And there are the moments where it's like the role play is like, it's hard, they have to convince someone, and I'm pretty good at that. But once we get into the actual combat, I'm like, I'm good at making the thing that I just messed up sound good.
Yeah.
I also want it to be good so then I can make it sound great.
Yeah. One of the, you're taking on the awesomely tough job of being a dungeon master. One thing that taught me a lot on how to be a better combat dungeon master was to just play as a player and really try to and I would just focus on my single class and learn the mechanics of that class until I had fully grasped it. And once I had done that, then I was like, oh, okay, I now understand how paladins work. Got it. Okay, and so now I can really work with a toolbox and an understanding on that kind of stuff. And so getting a few games under your belt as a player is a huge benefit to dungeon masters, especially for someone who's just like, I just dove into the deep end, which is fantastic. That's amazing that you did that, because that takes a lot of courage.
Definitely a bit scary.
Yes, that takes a lot of courage. But yeah, getting a few games as different characters under your belt, even just one-shots. I played, one of my favorite systems is the Call of Cthulhu horror system. Super fun. And I dove headfirst into that one. None of my friends knew it, and I really wanted to play it. So I'm like, well, I'll do it for you guys as a game master. So I ran 3 games for it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think I know what I'm doing. I've done it 3 times now, and I read the adventures. And then I had one of my friends run it for me. And when he ran it to me and I was just a player, I was like, whoa, this is way different. And it taught me a lot. And it taught me his style, and it really helped not only teach me a lot of just the basics, but it also really fired me up creatively, because I was like, wow, if he could do that, and I never thought about it doing that way. What if I did this? So there's a fantastic time. Every movie director watches a ton of films, and they don't just hit the ground running with a camera. They do. A lot of movie directors do. Same thing with musicians. Think of yourself as you are an artist. You're creating games. You're a game designer. So go out and play some games, and that's going to teach you a ton. That's a fantastic book.
I think I like have 1.5 games as a player under me. I had one game as in D&D where I did play as a player. Technically, the one that I'm talking about now is it's like a sequel to that, but at the same time, barely. But I did play a player in that one, but it's like you say a few, and I'm like, I feel like that would help me, because only having one, it's like, yeah, I know how wizards work. I don't really know much else.
Yeah.
We do have plans on eventually doing another one, but we're doing it where everyone in that group is taking turns being a DM. So after I'm done with this one, I think we're doing another one where they're going to do their own world. I'll get to play as I think I'm going a multi-class bard sorcerer. Weird setup, but I definitely I wrote that down for a reason. Playing as a player to DM better, because I do think I need to get more under my belt.
Yeah.
Because I have that, and then I did a Mutants and Masterminds game that did not run very well. It was not long enough that I feel like I got a whole ton of experience. Most of the fact that I was able to pull off a lot of what I did is just because I listened to so much D&D style podcasts when I was younger. It was stuff before Critical Role. It was I think there was this one series called Counter Monkey, and it was someone talking about it, their time in a DM shop, and that helped me a lot.
Yeah.
But,
that's a good way to kind of osmosis learn it, but
actually doing it is different.
Yeah, because
he's a really good dungeon master. I always try to play with Michael. He's one of
playing with an experienced dungeon master is fantastic for it. Those let's plays are great, but when it's wait a minute, which dice am I using for Smite again? Because I know Smite's a thing, and I know kind of how it works, but wait, which dice is it again? You don't know it until you've played as a paladin and used Smite a few times, and you're oh, it's just D10, or it's 3D10s, or it's this.
I feel like it taught me what rhythm feels good in a D&D game, but it didn't necessarily teach me how to actually achieve that rhythm. It just taught me this is what you want, not necessarily how to get there, and that's what I'm learning. Very much in the moment, which is very trial by fire.
Yeah. Now, one-shots are also a fantastic way to experiment, and also to give you a break as a dungeon master, and also to get more games under your belt, either as a player or a dungeon master. Just be hey, let's go buy a one-shot and let's just run it, or let's download a free one-shot, let's run it. Let's go to Get We Geek Together, not sponsored, because we're sponsored, and be hey, let's just do a 2-hour game there and see what a one-shot is there. I love one-shots. I've played way more one-shots than I have campaigns, and it just allows me to be free and try things out, and then the stuff that I really like is the stuff that I incorporate into my campaigns or my favorite characters, because then I'm so comfortable enough now. I know I've tried so many little dishes, I've tried so many samples. I now know what I really want to focus on, which is a politically deep, heavy tactical, super gritty, one-hit death. That sounds really appealing to me, but I wouldn't have ever been able to figure that out until I ran all these other things, and then I'm ooh, the next campaign I run is going to be Game of Thrones, that kind of stuff. So.
As far as understanding how character works, I could help if you want.
Yeah, honestly, so our in-store Dungeon Masters are a fantastic resource where you can come in any day that a Dungeon Master's in here, and if if they don't have a game at 4 p.m. and they're just sitting there, you can totally be hey, can we talk about clerics for an hour? And they would love to do that, and that's a free thing.
Yeah. Well, I think their specific problem has been their specific problem has been that they used a homebrew